So I finally have another equipment review, specifically a sword review. And I'd like to start off by thanking the friend of mine that sort of lent this to me to review, as well as fix up and sort of make more period accurate. But anyway, this is the Hanwei Tinker Pierce 9th century Viking sword. And one thing that I'd really like to say before I start actually going into the specs and everything, I do really like this sword, even though it doesn't quite work for the society that I'm with. So this sword was designed by Hanwei and Michael Tinker Pierce to be a sword that can be used to recreate Viking Age combat in WMA or Western martial arts. It's a fairly nice sword for what it does. It performs pretty well. One critique that I have of the whole thing is that it is fairly utility grade. They've done a few things to dress it up and everything, but it's still more or less utility things. But beyond that, it's pretty good. So to begin, the blade is 5160 spring steel, which means that it does have quite a bit of flex to it and doesn't really take a permanent set very easily. The tempering on it, I find with most of Hanwei's European products, at least, I don't have much experience with their Asian ones. They're soft. Pretty much every sword that has come up against this has bit into it somewhat. That being said, the bites usually aren't very deep unless it goes against something that has very square edges, like the that one's Dark Sword Armory. That name always escapes me for some reason. The Dark Sword Armory Norman pattern sword that it came up against one time. But those are fairly, I think, notoriously hard. So the overall length is 37 3/8. I do find it a little bit long, but it works. It gives you nice reach, but it also doesn't feel like it's altogether that long compared to this armor class sword, which is significantly shorter. I would say that's about 6 inches. And it has basically the same characteristics as this. Obviously not as bendy because it is a lot thicker, but it has the same feeling almost as this does. The blade is 30 7/8 of an inch long, and it weighs 2 pounds 12 ounces, which is not too much heavier than the armor class. And again, that's because of the thickness. The blade profile is way different as well. This sword actually has a very good blade profile, as far as I'm concerned, for a safe, relatively safe sparring weapon. So they've tried to match up safety with authenticity of blade profile. It's not quite the same as a 9th century Viking sword, but it's close. So the blade also has a distal taper. Near the hilt, it's 0.2 of an inch thick. At the tip, it's 0.085. And what that accounts for as well, the performance of it is definitely affected. It feels very nice. It is a very responsive weapon. But what it also does is allow for the final third of the blade to flex the way that a weapon that's used in WMA should. It shouldn't flex in the middle. It should be the final third, which this does very well. One of my only concerns about the blade for thrusting, which I'm not too convinced the Vikings would have done all that often. I mean, they probably would have because it is something you can kind of poke with. But it's not a Viking sword is not exactly the most effective for doing that. But the blade being that thin near the tip, as compared to something like this that actually has a swell at the end, this can actually pierce a gambeson pretty easily. Even considering that these can pierce a gambeson fairly easily. To make it a little more safe, the rolled tip would be nice, but then that would take away from its use as a reenactment weapon. The society that I'm with doesn't do true thrusts anyway, it's sort of a pulled thrust where you're actually hitting, you're coming in and turning, and basically hitting with the point of percussion here and dragging across. It's a lot safer. It doesn't quite have the same look to it as a actual thrust, but it is a little more safe, and it also saves chain the links in mail going flying off. So that's about that. Now the hilt assembly, it is a peened construction. It is fairly sturdy, keeping in mind that this has been around for a while and has been hit pretty hard. I've actually had to fix the guard on it. Now I've used a high impact epoxy to fix it on with some leather bits jammed inside. So the leather's impregnated with the epoxy. More epoxy is put in the holes, and then it's all jammed in, and that's actually fixed it very rigidly. Time will tell if that will actually stay. It all depends on how hard it gets hit again and how that epoxy actually holds. But it's a fix for now. And so a previous fix that was tried was actually wrapping below the guard with this wire. That worked for a while, and then it all worked free again anyway, and I think it's because the wood kind of got a bit crushed. Now the hilt assembly, the pommel and the guard, they're not really based off of anything in particular. They are styled after some period ones. I'm not too sure which Peterson typology it is, but they kind of did their job. The handle itself is actually, the grip is wood that's wrapped in this black leather. I don't like the black, mostly because the Vikings, in the Viking Age, they didn't actually have black dye, so they wouldn't have been able to do that. So one of the modifications that's happening to this is this whole thing is getting covered in a brown leather wrap, which I think makes it look a lot more attractive anyway. The black is very utilitarian looking, and that's that. These dot patterns, all of this punch work, it is a traditional technique. It's seen a lot on Viking Age jewelry as well as some sword hilts, and it does make it a little more attractive than if they had have just left it plain. And it does give contrast to this sort of trilobe, well, not really trilobe, but this divided section on the pommel. One thing that I don't like about it is you can kind of see there, between the two sections of the pommel, they tried to do a wire wrap inlay. And a number of companies do this, where they just cut a groove and then they kind of wrap this twisted wire thing through it. And to me, I can see why they would attempt to. They try to make it look more attractive. They try to make it look more like a period piece that does have a true wire inlay. But to me, it just looks like a kind of a crappy copy. Like I get the intent, but it just sort of fails on in my end, because it doesn't look right. And on the other side, you can kind of see where they join the ends of the wire by sticking them into little holes. It doesn't work for me, but to each their own, I guess. So this sword, it does take a beating. I really wouldn't do too many heavy thrusts with it, again, because of the tip. But it's a very nice sword, very responsive sword for the price. Now, I think the price is only $300, so it's a pretty decent deal for what it is. Would I recommend it to everybody? No. If you're going to do WMA sparring with it, that's a pretty decent thing. But I would honestly say, hey, save your money and get something a little bit better if you're going to be sticking into it for a very long time. If you are if you need to buy something now for that, and you only have, a few $100s to spend on it, this is probably a decent deal for it. But for reenactors, I wouldn't really recommend this one, because the major problem with it is because of the distal taper. It doesn't really suit the safety regulations of some societies. So again, I guess it depends on what society you're with. But the one that I'm with, it doesn't. The minimum edge thickness, I believe, has to be 3 mil. Because of the distal taper, it goes from about 3 mil down here to a lot less than 3 mil up here. So while that makes a better performing weapon, it also makes it so that it's not 100% safe for that society by those standards. And so for that reason, I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And if you want something that's fairly authentic, this kind of works, but there's a little bit of work that you have to do to it, doing a leather wrap and just changing the grip up a little bit. Other than that, it's not too bad. The good thing about it too is if you're doing sparring with this and you also want to do cut tests, you can buy this in both a reenactment blunt and a sharp, so you can basically use the same sword for both of your activities. So that's kind of a nice bonus, because I know if you took this sword, for example, if you ground away this blade in order to make it sharp, you'd ground away too much. It would change the performance characteristics too drastically. Whereas one of these, because it's produced in both sharp and blunt, with the proper profiles for both, and they try to keep the same performance characteristics in both, it's kind of a fun little object for that. So another thing to watch out for with this is that the steel does etch fairly easily. I would say even more so than the armor class swords, which don't really have a very corrosion resistant sword or steel. This Hanwei does etch very, very easily. So now one thing that it does come with as well is a scabbard. So again, this goes back to the utility aspect of it. Yes, it has hangers on it, but it's in this style that's a very modern style, with these kind of silvered fittings and stuff. So it doesn't really suit the sword. So if you're using it for just sparring and stuff, this is great. It's a plastic cord, leather wrapped scabbard, so it takes a beating, and it's good to have so you don't mess up the blade on your sword. But for reenactment purposes and anybody who wants something more historical, this just doesn't fly. So that's kind of a crappy thing. But hey, at least you get one. These are fairly easy to make or have made, and it's a somewhat period accurate. The one sort of caveat it has is that it doesn't have a core. So for reenactment, if you're wearing this, and you fall, it's just going to flop over and it's not going to hurt you. If you're wearing something that's wood cord and rigid like this one is, if you fall, this could end up jabbing you, or you could break this even. So that's what these are for. But the thing is, I'm not entirely certain that too many people in the Dark Ages battlefield would actually, if they had a sword, would they be wearing the scabbard on the battlefield if they knew that they were going to fight? Because again, if you fall, you trip, you get knocked over, and you break this when you're on campaign, or you're out on a raid, you're not going to be able to have somebody to be able to make this for you. You're not going to have the time to make it yourself. So, would you be wearing one? Probably not. But a leather thing like this is nice to have. So that's about it. It has its place. It does need a little bit of modification. It's not the most durable sword in the world, but it is decent. Surprising that it has a distal taper in the price range, and it's a decent sword for what you can use it for. So that's about it. Thank you for watching. If you like what you see, please don't hesitate to like and subscribe. And thanks again. So I figured I would show you guys the finished mod to the Hanwei sword. So I did that basically. Nice leather wrap. It just changes the look of it completely. In my opinion, it makes it look a lot better, a lot higher status and everything, and quite a lot more authentic than just a chunk of black leather, which I'm not entirely sure is real leather, but I could be totally wrong. It was just dry and kind of felt a little vinyl-y, but that also could be, you know, just the age of it and everything. So that's just a basic leather wrap over top. So that's it.